to Breaking Par with Bernard Sheridan, the golf instruction podcast that helps you take control of your game. Now, here's your host, the founder of Par Breakers Golf Academy and certified Golf Channel Swing Fix instructor, Bernard Sheridan.
I don't know why they teach that. So golf is utterly silly for putting. It's shameful that anybody considers it a serious undertaking to say that people have been teaching putting since 1870. They don't. Bobby Locke taught his stroke. Dave Stockton Jr. teaches what his daddy taught him, plus a little wrinkle. Stan Utley says he puts on an arc. He wrote a book and got it completely messed up and had to redo it. He actually swings straight back and straight through on tilt, but he didn't know that until after he wrote his book. So, you know, golf is terrible. And that takes 5 years to get to the point of actually realizing that. I paid great homage to everybody. I thought, okay, these guys are great golfers. They know what they're talking about. I'll read their book. But if you're honest about it and you read a book by somebody that played golf and putted well, and then you say, well, what did I learn? If you learn 3 things out of a 150 to 200 page book, you're lucky. That's a good book.
So when you decide, like for the average player, and they're going to read a putt, I know that, you know, I'm certified by you as a putting zone coach, and when we work together on that certification, essentially there was I want to say a scientific measurements that were calculated to decide how a break is actually going to be affected in the stroke. So, and it was done, and the way that you did it and showed me was with some very simple tools, not complex at all. And when that happened, it made it that aim point pretty much the same place above the cup, no matter how far you were from the hole. Or in other words, whether you were left of the hole, right of the hole, below the hole, above the hole. But if you were the same distance, let's say 12 feet, then it was always the same due to the slope and break. So can you give us a little bit more insight into how that's done?
Yes, certainly. First of all, I'm not teaching the kind of thing that's popular today where you have to look up your number of the aim in the book. In my view, that's cheating and it's not skillful and it needs to stop. You can understand mathematics as a golfer. That's just because you're an intelligent golfer. But what you need to do is be able to walk onto a green and understand what you're looking at, not look up something in a book.
Right.
Right. That's kind of offensive to me. But anyway, here's what you can look up in your head because you're an educated person. Most putts that you can actually sink are under 10 feet long. Just statistically, nobody's 50-50 outside of 10 feet.
Yes.
All right. Now, you want to be able to read any putt, no matter how complicated, no matter how short, no matter how long, no matter what the green speed is or anything. You want to read every putt possible. You want to have some sort of understanding how to do that. That's true. But you also want to be able to handle common garden variety inside 10 feet sinkable putts. That's what I call bushwhacking the greatest number of putts that you can possibly actually sink.
Right.
All right. Now, what you want to do is you want to have kind of a understanding of what those putts, how they are presented in real golf. Inside 10 feet, the following factors are almost always commonly true. Number one, the green speed is pretty normal. Most commonly you play a green speed that's normal for your experience. PGA Tour player, normal is 11 and above. For recreational golfers, 8.5 to 9.5 or 10 is normal. On a tournament week, they might stimp it up to 11 or something, but normal is somewhere between 9 and 10.
So your average. So what you're saying in that case is, the average player who's playing at a public or their country club, you're looking at between 8.5, 9.5 stemp, maybe 10,
yeah, maybe
and
10.
maybe 10, and then the average tour player that they're most of the events that they're playing in, the average stemp is somewhere around 11.
Yeah, it's usually 11 or above.
Okay.
All right, now, the number doesn't matter. What matters is the familiarity that your brain and your body has with what you're looking at.
Sure.
Okay, so basically brains go slow, medium, fast. And if your brain reacts to a certain green and says medium, you're good.
Right.
It's like the whole herd of cows, that's the path they walk back to the barn on. It's muddy, it's tracked up like crazy. Your brain's got that one. All right, so PGA Tour players, if they played stimp 13s every day, that'd make any difference because they'd be familiar with it.
Sure. I mean, and it's just like anything. When you're used to it, if it changes drastically, that's when it messes you up.
Right. Well, actually, the USGA has always tested stuff like how different are greens and how much do they change during the day, how much do they change from week to week, how much do they change from season to season. And the answer is stop worrying about it, people.
It's not enough to make a difference.
Don't be nuts. People just making you worry. They're sticking a worry bug up your butt and making you crazy. Stop it. It's the maximum difference between one green and another green out on the same golf course in the same climate and the same chemicals and the same irrigation and the same sunshine, shadows, and rain all year long, and the same crew mowing them all 18 exactly the same way every single day, every single week, is crazily, the outer limit is there might be a half a foot green speed difference. Might be one.
Yeah, which in the great scheme of thing is not going to make a darn really much of a difference at all in the way that a player hits
right.
or judges distance. Correct.
That's right. And they know that golfers are not capable of judging different green speeds. They can't tell which is the faster of two green speeds unless the difference between them is more than a half a foot difference.
Right. Sure.
So, you know, golfers are just nuts about what they think they need to worry about. They worry about stuff they can't do anything about, and they worry about stuff that's not even there.
Yeah, I think that most golfers, I think in general, most golfers are kind of nuts to begin with.
Yeah.
I think you got to kind of be a little bit nuts to play this game because there's so many variables in it.
Golf magazines and every little swing teacher in the world that sticks a toe in the world of putting, he's going to worry you to death about what you don't know. Well, they're just ignorant. You know, when you really get right down to it, normal's normal, by God. Deal with it.
Right.
Okay. All right. So, a makeable putt inside 10 feet, number one, 90-some% of the time you actually face one of those, the green speed is normal. Don't worry about the green speed. The second thing that's pretty normal is the surface between the ball and the hole doesn't have any hills and valleys in between. In other words, the surface may be sloped, but it's flat. If you take a CD-ROM disc, that's flat, but it's not level in gravity unless you slap it down on a well-made kitchen counter. But if you lift the CD-ROM up in the air and tilt it, it is still flat, but it's tilted.
Sure.
Okay, so greens are actually almost, I would say, inside 10 feet, over 80% of those putts are actually flat from the ball to the hole. All right, so what does that mean? That means that whatever break you got to deal with, it's a simple break. It's not going to have any wrinkles or complications in it because the ball on the way to the hole hits a hill or a different slope or a valley or any of that kind of stuff.
Right, so in other words, once it starts to break, it's going to break in the same direction. It's not going to all of a sudden break one direction and then back to another inside of 10 feet. That's just not going to happen. When you have long putts, there's definitely a chance of that happening. Let's say 30, 40, 50 footers, because it could break one way and then break another.
Yep, always does that.
Yep.
Okay, but anyway, those aren't makeable putts.
Absolutely. Well, not very low percentage of them are makeable, if at all. In other words, the percentage of you making it is very, very low.
That's correct. It's possible to make them, so the word makeable is a little bit too strong. But just for purposes of being clear about it, they're not makeable.
Right.
Quit worrying about it. But get close. If it goes in, that good, you know. Don't sit there and say every putt has to sink. That is the most stupid, unreal thing that anybody could ever believe.
Well, don't you think too, Geoff, that when you have that mindset, you're trying too hard. You're just trying too hard. I mean, in other words, you know, your body's, because I know that when people are trying too hard, they get too tense. They really aren't free. They can't just let it go. When they have more of the mindset, like you said, where it's like, don't worry about it, just go ahead and let it go, then they're going to be a lot more relaxed, a lot more natural, and probably get a heck of a lot closer to the hole. And then maybe if they're lucky, it'll go in.
Well, what you said was just, you got to the very positive advice, which is what I teach. I say, look, if you get so concerned about sinking a 30-foot putt, you know what's going to happen? Your skill is going to degrade because you're too worried that you're not open and relaxed to the perception information that comes in.
Yes.
You're so worried that your perception process is degraded and you're just not as good as you could be. Second, if you're relaxed and casual, your movement habit for line control and solid impact and correct distance and good tempo and rhythm, all that's going to be 30% better than the guy that's sitting there sweating his brow trying to sink the 30-footer.
Absolutely.
Therefore, the person who is relaxed, who does not worry about making the 30-footer, doesn't expect to make it, is just going to give it a good college try and hope to get lucky, he will sink 15 to 20% more than you.
Right.
Don't be the dumb guy. Don't be the dumb guy. It's not just psychological. It is your skill won't be worth a hoot.
Sure.
And, you know, you want to sink a whole bunch more putts, you know, sit in that guy. All right, now, let's back to the makeable putts. All right, we got green speed is normal, surface is flat, and we're inside 10 feet. Now what? Slope. What common slopes do you actually run into over and over and over most frequently? And the answer is 1%, 2%, 3%. You could run into a 4 or 5% slope, but it's not usual. It's kind of like a bell curve. How many getting a C in the class? How many getting a D? How many getting an A? Well, 2% is extremely common. 3%, 2.5 to 3%, pretty common, but not as common as a 2. 1% is actually not as common as a 2. A 2% does a better job on draining than a 1% does. So healthier greens, they feature 2% an awful lot.
And the majority of the reason why slope happens is due to drainage, yes? I mean, isn't that why an architect is putting slope in a green?
There's two aspects to the slope. One is don't make it dead level, because then the grass will drown because the water will come down and won't go away and the grass will die.
Right.
The other extreme is how steep can you make it before it's knocked off?
Right.
All right, now that answer is basically a combination of the grass speed and the slope. But for normal grass speeds, it's around stemp 10, the maximum slope before you can't have a pinnable position anymore, the ball won't even stay still on the slope, is about a 6%.
Right.
All right, so on the PGA Tour, stemp 11, they're looking at 5.5%. You just don't even pin that. All right, so the guy at the USGA that kept screwing up the setups by pinning too much slope, and then it got hot and windy, and the green sped up according to what he had hoped it was going to be. And then he completely ruined the U.S. Open on 3 different occasions, Olympia Fields, Southern Hills, and Shinnecock Hills, where they had to come out and water the 17th green at Shinnecock Hills, for example, between groups on Sunday in the U.S. Open, which is completely invalid.
Right, just to try to get it to hold the ball.
That's because he was parking it so close to a steep slope, but he guessed wrong on the green speed, and it got hot and dry, and the green speed got too much. That's not a pinnable position.
Right.
If the ball won't sit still on the slope, it's not a pinnable position according to the USGA guidelines. All right, so 1, 2s, and 3s are very common slopes. All right, we got a inside 10 foot. We have a normal green speed, maybe stemp 10. We have a 2% slope. Now let's get busy and read that putt. If I drew a clock around the hole and I wanted to line up the line from 6 o'clock on the rim to 12 o'clock on the rim through the center of the clock and where the hole is, that would be the fall line. I want to point that 6-12 line so that it actually coincides with the direction the surface is pointing uphill. If you take a CD-ROM and slap it down on a kitchen counter, it has 360 points around the rim, but it's not lifted in any one particular direction. So if you imagine a little tow truck back up to a CD-ROM and it's got 360 possible hooks around it, and it backs